Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of WWF Singapore's podcast series. In today's segment, we'll be talking about how local businesses in Singapore are using less plastic. And I'm sure you guys have heard about the phrase called circular economy. What exactly is circular economy? To facilitate this conversation, I have invited our subject matter expert, Wei Lin. Hello Wei Lin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, give us a brief introduction, and tell us about the work you're doing here at WWF Singapore?
Thanks for having me here, Jessie. I'm Wei Lin and I'm part of the market transformation team at WWF Singapore. One of the projects that I work on is Plastic Action, also known as PACT. Started by WWF Singapore and in line with WWF's No Plastic in Nature initiative. So circular economy, what it means essentially is to keep things in a loop. Keep our resources in a loop, all the materials in the loop, right? So what that actually looks like. So firstly, it means to cut it out at its source, to eliminate any unnecessary materials. This can be done through design, when things are first produced, is to think, hey, do we really need that material? Secondly, it's to keep resources in the loop. So this is done through reuse systems. How can we maximize the lifespan of this material or this product? And lastly, it's to recycle. So as in Singapore, you see the blue bin. So yes, a big part of circular economy is also recycling.
I see. Thank you, William, for simplifying it for us. From what I understand, only 6% of our plastic waste is being recycled in Singapore. So what are the limitations to recycling and why is this happening?
So there are a couple of reasons why recycling cannot be seen as the only solution. So firstly, it is because right from the start when we design things, right, there are different materials that go into a product. And sometimes when we want to recycle and take these products apart, it's really difficult. So another thing, it's also because that not all materials can go back and be recycled to its original form. So one type of product that can go back to its original form is a bottle. So but not many products are as simple as like a plastic bottle. Yeah, and also another big part of this whole equation is us as people, right? How do we actually recycle correctly? I think that's always kind of like a question. And while there are guidelines in place in Singapore by NEA, there are so many different types of products out there. So a big part of recycling is also how do we get individuals to recycle correctly? Yeah.
So what does recycling correctly looks like?
Yeah, that is such a good question. Recycling correctly, it's actually just to check, like firstly, like, hey, is this recyclable? So if you go online and you actually have a guideline of broad categories of what can be recycled, and more importantly, it's also to ensure that it's clean. Food waste is quite difficult to be washed off, but where it is possible, you can wash it, ensure that it's kind of dry, and then put it into the recycling bin.
Since we're on the topic of 3Rs, right? How much waste, actually plastic waste, that Singapore actually produce, and what does our waste management system looks like?
So in Singapore in 2022, we produce 1 million tons of plastic waste, and that is a lot of plastic waste that we are producing. And how we actually manage that is that it really depends. So in Singapore, the general waste gets sent to the incineration and then the waste to energy plants. But for the recyclables, so after they collect it in the blue bins, it gets sent to the materials recovery facility where it gets sorted, and then based on what material it is, it gets processed from there. And actually, plastics, while it's usually targeted, I would say that we should actually broaden our understanding and look at single use as a whole. And why I say that, it's because every material has an environmental impact, right? When you want to eliminate plastics, oftentimes we look to things like paper, but we need to stop and ask ourselves, where does paper actually come from? So when we look at materials, we need to look at their environmental impacts right from the start to how it's produced, and also how it's used and then how it's disposed. So when we look at that whole life cycle, we consider the water, the land use, the carbon emitted, And then we can kind of make more informed decisions. And from there, we realize that actually, since there is no perfect material, there's no silver bullet to this. It's actually a big part of it. It's our behavior and how we can create systems to ensure that we reduce waste as a whole.
So, William, from what you just said, our waste management system is pretty efficient, right? But as a society, we must recognize that waste reduction and sustainability goes beyond just waste management. So my next question is, how are businesses adapting and becoming more sustainable? And are there any challenges they are facing in this journey towards sustainability?
Yeah, definitely businesses play a big part in this whole equation, right? And a few of the businesses that we work with include hospitality, e-commerce, and retail malls. So they belong within that sector. And some of the things that they're trying to do is to reduce their single use, and to look at how they can improve their operations such that they reduce the amount of packaging involved. However, there are always going to be some form of pushback, like you alluded to. And why it's so difficult is because there are different factors at play. So one of it, it's also the customer's experience. When a customer wants to purchase something, what are the different considerations around that? And of course, there are costs involved and manpower involved that are also part of the equation. And we do need to consider those because we want the businesses to also be able to continue these practices in the long run. There are these kind of factors that the business have to consider, and that's why sometimes it takes a while for business to slowly transform, and it takes time for the market to move to become more sustainable.
So what is WWF Singapore's role in it, and how are we helping these businesses to transition?
So at WWF Singapore, we provide resources, we provide tools to get companies to become more sustainable in their practices. So we also do this through sectoral collaboration, where we get the whole sector to come together to try a certain system. And in doing so, we hope to show that it's possible and also to potentially think of how we can scale this as a sector. So one of the examples is the reusable e-commerce packaging pilot that we had last year in Singapore. So during the pilot, retailers could use the reusable packaging and mail it to their customers, and the customers would then mail it back to the retailer or to pass it back to them if they have a storefront. So we tested this, and yeah, we were very glad to hear that people were excited about it, and we are still looking at how we can make this a reality in Singapore.
That is actually amazing, Lynn. Thank you for sharing with me today. So let's look inwards a little bit, and let's talk about what are the small changes we can make in our daily life to sort of reduce single-use plastic?
Great question. So for me, I love coffee a lot. I need my morning coffee and an afternoon coffee. And because I know that's my lifestyle, so what I do is that I bring a reusable cup around. And I really like the reusable cup that I have because it's collapsible, so it can fit into all my bags. And while it is just one small thing that I do, I realize that it actually also sparks conversations with the people around me. So yeah, so that's just one small thing that I do to reduce the waste that I already will produce.
That's amazing, Lillian. Thank you for being here with us today and sharing your knowledge with us as well. Individuals like you and me definitely have a part to play. But beyond that, WWF Singapore is helping businesses transition their business model into a more sustainable one. If you want to know more about how we're helping them, click in the link below. Until then, watch out for our next episode.